Okay, welcome to Quideo number 1. So, here we have a question about pieces of pottery and the chemicals that are contained in the clay and the percent of the chemicals contained in the clay and which sites they came from. So, we have 3 different sites all containing the 3 different chemicals, each with the box plot that represents the data for those chemicals. Alright, question A. For chemical Z, describe how the percents found in the pieces of pottery are similar and how they are different among the 3 sites. Okay, so right off the bat, if we look at all 3 chemical Z's for site 1, 2, and 3, we realize that they all have a median around 7. So that's a really big similarity between the 3. That's also one of the only similarities besides site 1 and site 3 having quartile 1 at 5 and a quartile 3 at 8. Now for the differences. So since site 1 and site 3 have the same interquartile range, we can look at site 2 and notice that the interquartile range for there is a lot smaller because quartile 1 and quartile 3 are in a different spot. Then if we look at the minimum and maximum of all 3 sites for chemical Z, we notice that site 1 has a minimum at 4 and a maximum of 10, site 2 has a minimum of 6 and a maximum of 8, and site 3 has a minimum at 3 and a maximum at about 11. So that's about all the differences that we can see looking at the spread and the center of the box plots. So now let's look at question B. Consider a piece of pottery known to have originated at one of the 3 sites, but the actual site is not known. Part I of question B. Suppose an analysis of the clay reveals that the sum of the percents of the 3 chemicals X, Y, and Z is 20.5. Based on the box plots, which site 1, 2, or 3 is the most likely site where the piece of pottery originated? Justify your choice. So, right off the bat, we look at site 1. So, I went ahead and wrote in all the different medians that I found for each of the chemicals. So, the first one is 7.5. Chemical X is 7.5. Chemical Y is 13. And chemical Z is 7. So, if we look over to our calculator and add these numbers up, 7.5 plus 13 plus 7, we see that we get a value of about 27.5. So that means that we have a difference of 7%, which means that the piece of pottery is not going to come from site 1. So now we can move on to site 2. Again, I've already calculated the medians for each of these, and now let's go back over to the calculator and add these up again. So we have a median of 6, a median of 3, oh, that's a 9, oops. A median of 3, and a median of 7. So if we add all 3 of those up, we get a value of 16, which is 4.5 lower than the 20.5 required to find which site the piece of pottery comes from. All right, that means that site 3 is going to be the place where the piece of pottery came from. But just in case, we're going to check to make sure that these 3 values add up to 20.5. So back to the calculator. So we have a value of 6, a value of 7.5, and a value of 7. So we add those together, and we get an exact value of 20.5. Right there, see, 20.5, awesome. All right, so that means that the piece of pottery that we've found came from site 3 because all 3 median values come from sum together to be 20.5. Okay. Part 2 of question B. Suppose only one chemical could be analyzed in the piece of pottery. Which chemical, X, Y, or Z, would be the most useful, in identifying the site where the piece of pottery originated? Justify your choice. So, let's just start from the beginning. So, site 1, chemical X. As we can see, has a median of about 7.5. Then we're going to look at the median of chemical X at site 2, which has a median of 6. And then again at site 3, there was also a median of 6 for chemical X. So that would mean it would be hard to choose which chemical, where the piece of pottery could come from based off chemical X, because site 2 and site 3 have the same median value for the chemical X. That would basically mean that if you had a piece of pottery that had 6% of chemical X in it, you wouldn't be able to figure out which of these two sites it came from, since it's the same value, and you can only look at one of the chemicals. So next up, we look at chemical Y. So as we can see, they're all pretty different. The median, especially. So for site 1, we have a median of 13. For site 2, a median of 3, and for site 3, a median of 7.5. So knowing that all three of those are different, we know that it's going to be pretty easy to figure out that where the piece of pottery came from. Also, we can look at the interquartile range between the three, which again is all different. And then the minimum and maximum of all three, again, is all different and has no overlaps, which is another big thing. That's a big thing, because if you were to have a value that landed inside that overlap, then you wouldn't be able to choose which site it came from, because it'd be an overlapping value. So that would mean that chemical Y would probably be the best to use to determine which site it came from, because all three sites have a different chemical Y range for their box plots. But just in case, we're going to check chemical Z for site 1, 2, and 3 just to make sure. So right off the bat, we can see that both site 1 and site 3 have a median of 7. So that is, again, like I said, for chemical X, is a big thing, because if you were to have percent of chemical Z for site 1 of 7, well, not for site 1, but just in general, chemical Z percent of 7%, you wouldn't be able to figure out which site it came from, since site 1 and 3 have the same median. Also, we can see that the interquartile range is the same for site 1 and 3. So that pretty much confirms that the best chemical to use to determine which site the piece of pottery came from would be chemical Y, because all three are different again, and the other two are the same pretty much. And that's all. I hope these are helpful for you in the future, and good luck on your AP test. Adios.